The December wind swept across Mayfair with sharp force, cutting through silk and pride alike. Eleanor Hartwell felt it bite her skin as she stepped down from the hired carriage onto the frost-hard street. The Ashworth townhouse glowed ahead, bright with candlelight and laughter. It looked warm, rich, and alive. It looked like a place where she did not belong. Tonight was the final grand ball of the season. Inside those walls, futures would be settled, engagements would be whispered, names would be remembered. Eleanor already knew what waited for her. Nothing. She was 28, dressed in green silk that had seen too many winters. Her brown hair was arranged neatly by her own hands. No maid, no fortune, no promise. A gentleman's daughter now living in her widowed sister's house, counting each winter by how much colder it felt than the last. As she crossed the threshold, her reflection flashed in a polished mirror. She saw a woman trained to take up little space, a woman used to being overlooked. She lifted her chin and entered anyway. The ballroom opened before her like a living thing. Crystal chandeliers threw light across the polished floor. Couples moved in careful steps beneath painted ceilings. The orchestra played with urgency, as if music alone could force hope into every unmarried heart. Eleanor slipped to the edge of the room, adjusting her thin green glove with fingers that trembled despite her calm face. Then the voice came, smooth, sweet, sharp. Still a spinster. Lydia Harbury stood before her in crimson silk, flawless and confident. Her smile was practiced, the kind that cut deeper than open cruelty. Around her stood other young women, leaning in, eager to listen. "My dear Eleanor," Lydia said, her fan fluttering softly. "One would think by now some gentleman might have taken pity, but I suppose even charity has its limits." The music did not stop, the dancers did not pause. Yet the moment felt frozen. Eleanor felt eyes turn toward her. She heard the whisper travel fast, still unwed, still invisible. Her glove slipped at the wrist. "You are most generous with your observations, Miss Harbury," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "Pity has never been among my expectations." She turned away. It was a retreat, but a dignified one, her eyes fixed on the parquet floor as if its patterns held answers she had missed all her life. What she did not see was the man watching from the shadow near the grand staircase. Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Ravensford, stood with an untouched glass of champagne. His grey eyes followed the exchange with quiet focus. He had attended many balls. He disliked them all, yet this one revealed something new, a cruelty, sharper than battle, women destroying one another while calling it propriety. He watched Eleanor move toward the balcony doors, watched her pause, steady herself, and step into the cold night air. The Duke felt something shift inside him. Eleanor stood alone on the balcony, breathing deeply. The winter air burned her lungs, but it was cleaner than the ballroom. Below, the street lay dark and still. A single carriage waited, its brass fittings catching the lamplight. "Miss Hartwell." She turned quickly. The Duke stood at the doorway, tall and unreadable. She curtsied at once. "Your Grace." "You were insulted this evening," he said calmly. "I have suffered many insults, Your Grace," she answered before she could stop herself. One grows used to the sound. He joined her at the balustrade, his eyes on the street below. "Tell me," he said quietly, "when your rival spoke, what did you see in her?" Eleanor hesitated. "I felt only my own smallness." He shook his head once. "Strength does not require an audience. What I saw was fear dressed as confidence." She swallowed. No one had ever said that to her. "You did not match her cruelty," he continued. "You refused to make yourself smaller by joining her game." "I am not sure that makes me virtuous, Your Grace." "Perhaps not," he said, "but it makes you rare." He turned and placed a small cream card into her gloved hand. His fingers lingered nearby. "My carriage waits below. When this evening ends, I would be honored to see you safely home." "That would be improper," she said softly. "So is cruelty," he replied. "Yet it is practiced freely." He bowed with formal grace and stepped away, leaving Eleanor alone with the card warming in her palm and the sudden knowledge that someone important had seen her. 3 nights later, she stood in a library that seemed to hold the world. Leather-bound books lined the walls of the Duke's townhouse. The gathering was small, select, intentional. "You favor books over conversation," the Duke said as he appeared beside her. "Books permit silence," she replied. "People rarely do." For the first time he smiled. He placed a volume in her hands. "Alone," he said. "We shall discuss it when you finish." She knew then this was not kindness without purpose. It was an invitation. As she left that night, Elena felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. And somewhere in London, the Duke of Ravensford watched his carriage disappear down the street, knowing that a single glance in a ballroom had begun something that could not easily be undone. The days after the ball passed with a strange quiet. Elena moved through her sister's house as she always had, careful, polite and grateful for every kindness. Yet something inside her had shifted. The card from the Duke rested in her reticule like a secret that warmed her hand whenever she touched it. 3 nights later, she arrived at the Duke's townhouse on Belgrave Square. The gathering was small and controlled, nothing like the crowded balls of the season. Soft music filled the rooms, candles burned low, the air smelled of polished wood and old books. Elena found herself drawn to the library. Tall shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling steadier there than anywhere else in the house. "You choose books before people," the Duke said, as he came to stand beside her. "Books do not judge silences," she replied. "They allow them." He nodded, as though she had spoken a truth he already knew. He selected a blue-bound volume and placed it in her hands. It was poetry. He told her to take it as a loan. They would speak of it when she finished. She understood the meaning at once. He was not offering charity, he was offering continuation. In the weeks that followed, his invitations came with quiet regularity. A small concert where they sat side by side. A visit to the British Museum, where he asked her thoughts and waited for her answers. A simple dinner, with only a few guests, where conversation moved easily and without cruelty. Elena discovered a different London, one where her opinions were heard, one where silence was not mistaken for weakness. She learned that the Duke carried himself with control, yet possessed a dry humour that surprised her into laughter. She noticed the scars on his hands and the care with which he guided her through rooms crowded with attention. Still, there were no promises, no declarations. Only a growing closeness held carefully within the bounds of propriety. At public gatherings, Lydia Harbury watched closely. She laughed louder when the Duke was near. She placed herself where she might be noticed. Yet his gaze passed over her without warmth. When his eyes found Elena instead, Lydia's smile tightened. Elena told herself not to hope. Men of his station did not change their lives for women like her. Kindness could exist without intention. Attention could fade. Then the letter arrived. It came on thick cream paper, sealed in dark wax. Elena's hands shook as she opened it. The Duke wrote of honesty, of matters yet undisclosed, of a conversation that must take place before any future could be understood. He would call on Friday at 3. Elena did not sleep the night before his visit. Questions crowded her thoughts. Had scandal reached him? Had duty reclaimed him? Had she mistaken meaning for comfort? The Duke arrived precisely on time. He sat in the small parlour, too large for the delicate furniture, his posture rigid. "I must speak plainly," he said. "Nothing less will suffice." Elena folded her hands and waited. He told her of his work within government, of a case that had come to him nearly 2 years before. A widow had brought him proof of fraud committed against her late husband's estate. The man responsible held power and protection. To speak openly would have ruined her. The Duke had intervened quietly. He had ensured a measure of justice without public destruction. Then he looked at Elena. "That woman was your cousin," he said, "the widow of James Hartwell." The room seemed to tilt. Elena had believed her cousin lived in modest comfort. She had never known of such danger or desperation. "Your cousin spoke of you often," the Duke continued. "She feared burdening you." She described you as a woman of steady kindness and quiet strength. He took Elena's hand. His grip was firm, grounding. I sought you out because I had already seen your character through her eyes. What I have learned these past weeks has confirmed it. Elena felt tears rise, uninvited and unstoppable. I did not come to you as a duke today, he said. I came as a man who has witnessed cruelty and silence in equal measure. I have never met a woman who carries dignity as you do. His voice lowered. I wish to speak my intentions openly and properly, before witnesses, before society, but only if you permit me. Elena could not speak at once. The weight of his words pressed against her chest. At last she nodded. 1 week later, the Ashworth ballroom filled again. Rumour had spread that the Duke of Ravensford would make an announcement. The crowd gathered hungry for spectacle. Elena entered on her sister's arm, dressed not in green but in gold. Her hair was adorned simply. Around her neck rested a small locket sent by the Duke. When he arrived, the room fell silent. He crossed the floor directly to her and took her hand. His voice carried with calm authority as he spoke of judgment, cruelty, and false measures of worth. He spoke of a woman who had been dismissed and overlooked. Then he knelt. The gasps swept through the room like a wave. Miss Elena Hartwell, he said, will you become my wife? Tears streamed down her face as she answered yes. As he rose and drew her into the first dance, Elena saw Lydia Harbury standing frozen, her certainty shattered. In that moment, the story the world had written for Elena ended. And a new one began. The ballroom no longer felt like a place of judgment. As Elena moved across the floor with the Duke of Ravensford, the eyes upon her had changed. Where there had once been pity and mockery, there was now awe. The orchestra played with renewed strength, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as the woman they had dismissed was claimed with certainty. Elena felt as though she were walking inside a dream. The Duke's hand rested at her back, steady and sure. His gaze never left her face. In that moment, the noise of the room faded. There was only the rhythm of the music and the quiet truth settling into her heart. She had not been mistaken. She had been seen. Around them whispers rushed like wind through tall grass. Women leaned close to one another. Men stared openly. Lydia Harbury stood near the edge of the floor, her carefully built world undone. For the first time, she was the one unseen. When the music ended, the Duke did not release Elena at once. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. You were never what they called you, he said. You were always who you are now. Elena could not speak. She could only nod, her eyes bright with tears that no longer carried shame. In the days that followed, London spoke of little else. The engagement of the Duke of Ravensford became the season's greatest shock. Some praised it as romantic. Others whispered of scandal. The Duke paid no attention to either. He moved forward with calm purpose, announcing his intentions openly, and without apology. Elena faced the change with quiet courage. Invitations arrived daily, doors opened that had once been closed. Yet what mattered most was not society's sudden approval. It was the steady presence of the man who walked beside her, treating her worth as something long established rather than newly discovered. 3 months later, spring softened the grey edges of the city. On a clear morning filled with pale sunlight, Elena Hartwell stood in a small chapel, her hands folded and her heart full. The ceremony was simple. Only family and true friends were present. No crowd pressed in. No performance was required. The Duke stood at the altar in formal dress, his expression unreadable to all but her. When Elena entered, wearing ivory silk and her mother's lace veil, he looked at her as though the world had narrowed to that single moment. His composure broke only once when she reached his side and he drew a careful breath. They spoke their vows without flourish. Each word was clear. Each promise was chosen. When he placed the ring upon her hand, Elena felt the final weight of her old life lift away. As they left the chapel together, sunlight spilled across the steps. The Duke offered his arm, not as a gesture of ownership, but of partnership. Elena took it without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, she learned the rhythms of Ravensford House. She walked through vast libraries filled with knowledge. She tended quiet gardens where roses climbed old stone walls. She sat beside her husband in long conversations that ranged from history to human nature. Yet it was in the smallest moments that she felt the greatest change. The way he listened when she spoke, the way he paused before decisions to ask her thoughts, the way he looked at her across a room, as though her presence anchored him. One evening, Elena stood in their private study and opened a small case resting on the mantel. Inside lay a single green silk glove, carefully preserved. She smiled softly as she held it. The Duke came to stand behind her. "You kept it," he said. "It reminds me," she replied, "of who I believed myself to be, and who I was proven to be." He placed his hands gently over hers. "You were always whole," he said. "The world simply failed to notice." Elena thought often of that first night on the balcony, of the cold air and the waiting carriage, of the card warming her palm. Her life had divided in that moment, though she had not known it then. She had not been saved. She had not been transformed by fortune. She had been recognized. And in being truly seen, she had stepped into the life that had been waiting for her all along.